In 1928, William Spratling, an instructor at Tulane University's School of Architecture, arrived in Taxco, Mexico, and decided to stay. In 1931 or 1932, he founded a silversmithing workshop, Las Delicias, later Spratling y Artesanos, employing skilled local craftsmen to produce his designs. Even though there was an established community of indigenous silversmiths, they were struggling to survive on local sales of traditional wares. The prevailing narrative, repeated in many historical sources, is that Spratling, often called an artistic visionary, quote, found inspiration in pre-Hispanic, colonial, and Mexican folk motifs for his own designs, and that, with persistent and skillful marketing, especially to the rising numbers of North American tourists, established a flourishing trade in the region. Taxco was a traditional site of silver mines, but was said to have no native silver working industry. Spratling began designing works in silver based primarily on pre-Columbian and traditional motifs and hired local goldsmiths to produce those designs in Taxco. Spratling was the primary designer for his workshop and was insistent on the high quality of materials and techniques used in production. An early example of his work is this silver jaguar pendant, which recalls this carved stone feathered serpent heads in the Quetzalcoatl pyramid. Spratling's modest upbringing and academic career seems almost incongruous with his later renown. He was born in 1900 in Livingston County, New York, the son of the Dr. William P. Spratling. After the deaths of his mother and sister, he moved to his father's boyhood home in Alabama and graduated from Alabama Polytechnic Institute. After first teaching in the architecture department there, he took a similar position at Tulane in New Orleans, where he also partook of the town's cultural offerings and came to know figures like Sherwood Anderson and William Faulkner, with whom he shared a house. While lecturing at the National University of Mexico's summer school in 1926 through 1928, Spratling quickly integrated himself into the Mexican art scene and became a friend and a strong proponent of the work of muralist Diego Rivera, for which he organized an exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Using money received from commissions he organized for Rivera, Spratling bought his home in Taxco in 1928, where he also began work on a self-illustrated book, Little Mexico, about this small mountain town. During the few years in Taxco before Spratling initiated his silver workshop, he wrote frequently about Mexican art and literature from 1928 to 1931 for the New York Times Book Review and the New York Herald Tribune Books Abroad section, with illustrations either by Spratling or a celebrated Mexican artist. Spratling was also gay, and one source reports a rumor that it was a homosexual incident that led to his resignation from Tulane in 1928. Later, a young Mexican was called the great love of Spratling's life, leaving him despondent when the man left him and married a woman and started a family. Spratling's workshop, or taller, was organized in a classic apprenticeship structure. That differs from the structure of standard factory production in several major respects. First and foremost, it is labor-intensive rather than mechanized, and each finished product passes through several skilled manual processes, as opposed to a mechanical assembly line. Furthermore, production emphasis is placed on design innovation rather than standardization, and the product is marketed on the basis of craftsmanship and inherent aesthetic qualities. The large taller, however, also differs from the traditional craft industry where each piece is the product of a single artisan. The large Taxco school tailles were unique, and nowhere else in Mexico did the working of silver reach this level of organization. The division of labor in the taller is based upon a formal social and economic hierarchy, and a worker's place within it is defined by skill. One enters as a zorita, an apprentice who performs the unglamorous tasks of sweeping and buying sodas and snacks for the smiths while they observe the process at close range. If the smiths are satisfied with the performance of the zorita and his abilities, which at that stage are essentially a willingness to accept authority and an interest in silversmithing, the apprentice is permitted to sit down on the bench and take hold of the arc, as the expression goes. The zorita works with the arc until he can cut a straight line. His first pieces follow established models, and his progress is measured by his ability to execute more elaborate work. Though he allied himself with Mexican culture, Spratling's rationale for forming his business was solidly American. In a very early interview in 1934 for the New Orleans Times-Picayune, Spratling made clear how his concept of the taller had evolved. Quote, "We can teach the Indians nothing in the way of handcraft or artistry. The only thing I have done is to capitalize this gift. Instead of leaving all this precious metal and graceful workmanship to lie around loose, I persuade them to come into a shop. At least you might call it a shop. It is really just my house. And when I suggested to them that they might work 8 hours a day, and I would pay them from 2 to 4 pesos for their labor, they seized on the idea with enthusiasm. Indians aren't so different from the rest of us. The idea of a steady salary looks good to them too," unquote. There is little doubt that Spratling's efforts were successful. Now more accessible from Mexico City by a newly completed road, many travelers found their way to Taxco. As the town developed, so did Spratling's business, and by 1935, he opened an elegant showroom as well. By about 1938, he employed about 100 people to meet the demand. His thriving apprenticeship system cultivated local talent, and following the model of Las Delicias, many of the original 14 Spratling apprentices decided to establish their own independent workshops. Antonio Pineda, Antonio Castillo, the brothers Castillo, Salvador Terran, and Hector Aguiar were by this time master silversmiths in their own right. Despite the relative uniformity of the Grand Taller structure, each shop and its wares reflected the patron's own distinctive expression. It became evident in the design and the special approaches to silver crafting, as well as the general running of the taller. Patrons such as Spratling operated as the liaison between the client and the workshop, taking an active role in marketing the taller's silver. Foreign companies and individual clients usually prefer to identify and deal with the taller and its owner directly. As a result, the contributions of master smiths and designers have often been overlooked. Taxco became the world's silver jewelry center, popularly known as, quote, the Silver City. American tourists flock to Taxco to buy silver jewelry and keepsakes and enjoy the nightlife, as seen in this picture of a group enjoying a serenade at Los Arcos restaurant in the 1950s. The different tallers advertised their wares in English-language newspapers published in Mexico, like the news seen here with a Taxco page spotlighting an editorial article with the title Taxco, the Silver World, and advertisements for various tallers of the time. By 1950, Taxco was home to almost 150 silver shops, and Spratling had an international following. As early as 1941, the Los Angeles branch of the famed department store I. Magnin advertised an exclusive series from, quote, Spratling of Taxco, whose, quote, rediscovery of traditional Mexican motifs is world famous. Even Hollywood luminaries made the pilgrimage to Taxco, to Spratling's ranch, including director John Huston, actress Marilyn Monroe, and even Dalton Trumbo, the blacklisted screenwriter who bought the necklace seen here for his wife. Spratling had expanded beyond sales at Las Delicias in the 1930s and into wholesale. He employed over 500 artisans in the workshop to meet the demand in the U.S. for luxury goods during World War II. Spratling silver was sold through the Montgomery Ward catalog and at Neiman Marcus and Saks Fifth Avenue. With the cost of moving the workshop to an ancient silver hacienda, La Florida, Spratling incorporated to provide cash flow for his company. However, in 1945, a majority of those shares were sold to North American investor Russell McGuire, whose business practices ultimately took the company into bankruptcy. Spratling was able to resume his silver designs in the late 1940s and establish a new workshop at a ranch he had purchased outside of Taxco, where he worked until he was killed in an automobile accident outside the town on August 7, 1967, at the age of 66. Spratling left his mark on Mexico in several ways. In addition to the high aesthetic and monetary value assigned to his own designs, he is universally credited with stimulating the revival of silver craftsmanship in Taxco, which remains Mexico's leading silversmithing center. Another legacy is a museum in Taxco housing his collection of antiquities. Yet the still prevailing mythology about Spratling obscures a more complicated history that involves issues of artistic appropriation, labor injustice, and accusations of self-dealing as a collector and dealer in pre-Columbian art. He was suspected of selling fakes and of illegally trafficking in antiquities not eligible for export at a time when Mexican laws on the matter were rarely enforced. This prompts the need for a reevaluation of his work and his artistic standing. And in his wake, the residual effect on Mexico's native artisans also merits interrogation.